Can everyone say 30 by 30? All right, so I'm going to turn it over to the secretary in a minute. You're not going to have to listen to me all morning, but I want to let you all know that one, we are doing this meeting hybrid, which is why we're trying to get started on time. I promise you'll have tons of time later to visit, many hours in the afternoon. The Wi-Fi, there's a guest Wi-Fi. It's very easy. You can get on that. The bathrooms are open downstairs. Everything should be straight up and easy. I don't think I have anything else to say. I'm going to turn it over to Secretary Crowfoot to welcome you all, and I'll be back in a bit. I did forget a really important thing. Sorry. We are doing live interpretation, so I'm going to make all the speakers slow down, including myself. So if I start to go fast, you have to wave to me. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Well, listen, thanks everybody for being here, and welcome to our new agency headquarters here in Sacramento. In the room, we have at least a couple few hundred leaders from every corner of the state, and then we're joined online, I understand, by several hundred more. And it's true that we come from all corners of this incredible state. We are state, tribal, federal, local government. We are conservation groups, environmental organizations, resource conservation districts, land trusts. We are land managers and natural resource managers, scientists, academics. This is a broad, diverse universe of people that are all committed to do more to conserve and protect nature in California and on this planet. And so I've been waiting for this day and this convening for quite a long time. We all find ourselves at a critical moment. It goes without saying. Climate change is on the march across our planet. Hotter temperatures, unstable climate, manifesting in so many ways that we're all feeling in our daily lives. Worsening wildfire, drought, extreme heat, the fear of flood and sea level rise never too far away, impacting some communities worse than others, and impacting this incredible natural biodiversity we have in California. We're seeing mass extinction across the planet and in North America. We know that the planet is in crisis. I'll also be honest and say that, you know, human activity is obviously a primary driver of these challenges. But from our perspective, humans are the problem, but also the solution. And that's really where you come in. So I'll talk in a little bit about the movement that we're part of. And we call it a movement. 30 by 30 is not a policy initiative. It's certainly not a governmental program. It's a movement. And it's supporting the work that you have been doing for a long time. And it's really mobilizing all of us together to move further and faster to conserve nature, protect nature, do what we need to do to combat climate change, absorb carbon from our atmosphere, buffer climate impacts, to protect biodiversity, and to use this initiative to ensure more access to our outdoors and our nature for more people in California, recognizing that there's fundamental inequity in access to the lands. And then we do this with the recognition that there have been people in what we know as California for thousands of years, since time immemorial, our native communities, our tribal communities, who have stewarded these lands effectively for thousands of years. And frankly, over the last 170 years, we have cut ourselves off from that leadership and that knowledge. So we come here today recognizing the challenge, but also the opportunity. And so before I share more about the partnership, I wanted to ask a few of our leaders to share their own thoughts. We are driving on 30 by 30 as a result of a remarkable partnership between Governor Newsom and our legislature. So I'll first ask our team to cue a video, which is a special message from Governor Newsom to us today.
Hey everybody, it's Governor Gavin Newsom here, interjecting. Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot, your amazing host, for the opportunity to say a few words as we kick off more formally our 30 by 30 partnership. You know, we're here to celebrate all of you, celebrate Secretary Crowfoot's extraordinary work, but also the collective vision and wisdom of thousands and thousands of Californians that work every single day to protect and care for the lands that make our state so special. But what we offer as a state goes well beyond beautiful landscapes. It's thriving ecosystems like ours that absorb carbon pollution and also help us move towards our goal of carbon neutrality. California is home. We host some of the nation's rarest species and is considered, I love this, we're considered just one of 36 biodiversity hotspots on the globe, just one of 36. Think about that. California's on the front lines of climate change and solutions, but also on the front lines of climate change and challenges, experiencing record-breaking wildfire seasons, mega droughts that have impacted megawatts, and of course, extreme heat. That seems to be getting more extreme each and every year. What more evidence do we need than September of this year? Biodiversity loss and climate change, by definition, then, are just two sides of the same coin. Both threaten the health and lifestyle of all of us on the planet. In 2020, this is why in 2020, I signed an executive order committing California. I think we were one of the first, if not the first state in the nation, committing ourselves to this 30 by 30 initiative. But here in California, we know that, just signing an executive order and talking isn't enough. We need strategies, we need plans, we need you. And yes, more importantly than plans, strategies, is results. And by the way, we're starting to see them. Many of you may know this, but I'm proud to highlight it, 24% now, 24%. I think that's a pretty good number of our lands, and 16% of our coastal waters are already conserved. And I say that's impressive for this reason. No other state in the lower 48 can lay claim to that. No other state. That's more than any other state in the lower 48. But we also know, because I know you expect me to say this, that we're not even close to being done. And that's why, as part of that record-breaking $54 billion climate commitment we just passed, we put $1.5 billion specifically earmarked to restore and protect habitats. Because we figured out how to conserve as a consequence of your good work and the strategies and plans and the pursuit through the executive order, how to conserve another 6 million acres of lands and 500,000 acres of coastal waters. And today, as we launch more formally our 30 by 30 partnership, we're including tribal, regional, and local partners, land trusts, resource conservation districts, academics. Let me though say, just because I think it's important, just looking to the future, but also sort of reflecting on the past. California's violent disruption of Native peoples' lands stewardship has driven, it's important to say this, has driven many of the climate challenges we ironically currently face. And that's why it's so important, and I'm really proud of your work in this space, that we include tribal leadership in our conservation and climate efforts. It's foundational, it's invaluable, and we're grateful for their willingness to share their knowledge and to partner with us. We're also lucky to have federal partners as well who understand the urgency of the climate crisis. That was not the case just a few years ago. We don't take that for granted. And they're willing to not just address it intellectually, but to act on it substantively, which of course they just did with that $369 billion record-breaking package, of which resources will be coming to advance our 30 by 30 efforts. And that won't happen. We will not complete our goals without that federal action, that federal support. Look, we know our success, requires collective wisdom, collective action, and a little humility and creativity. So let's put in the work now while we still can and move forward to a greener, a healthier, a better future for ourselves, our families, and our communities.
Well, as I mentioned, it's not only our governor who have been driving by 30 by 30, it's leadership on both our state senate and our assembly. So I'm next excited to introduce via Zoom Nancy Skinner. Many of you know Senator Skinner, who represents the Bay Area and who is a driver on environmental policy and funding for the environment in her role leading the budget discussions in the state senate. So without further ado, she did not get it. Okay. Next time you see Nancy Skinner, ask her about 30 by 30. But I know she wanted to be here, and I'll just say her team was really wonderful when we were discussing opportunities and funding for 30 by 30. I think we all recognize that we need a lot of funding to actually reach this goal, and she's going to be a great champion on this. But speaking of champions, really the seed was planted on 30 by 30 in Sacramento by Ash Kalra, our assembly member who represents the South Bay and who was an early, strong, consistent voice calling for the state to step up on 30 by 30 as an international movement. And we have Assembly Member Kalra here today. So Ash, please join us.
Well, since Senator Skinner couldn't make it on Zoom, I'll just take up her time. But in all seriousness, it's so great to have a partner like Senator Skinner, particularly in her role as budget chair, to have such a strong environmentalist in that role, because there's no doubt that we need funding for all the great things that we want to do as it applies to protecting our state, our country, and our planet. And I want to start by thanking Secretary Crowfoot and the California Natural Resources Agency for inviting me, and more importantly, for your incredible leadership, your team, Jennifer Norris and the entire team that really put so much energy and thought and passion into what we need to do to continue our leadership as a state, and not just for the sake of being leaders, but because we know that we must do this, and we know that so many eyes are watching California. I'm really glad to be here with all of you on this momentous occasion to kick off the 30 by 30 partnership. And today does mark a very important step, building a strong, supportive coalition with engaging conversations and strategic planning is going to be key to achieving our land and water conservation goals. As we all know, California continues to demonstrate its leadership role on environmental issues. And while I'm proud of this first step that we are taking today, we all know there's still much more work to do, as we heard from our governor. No matter what the governor does, no matter what we do in the legislature, we know, and we're grateful for the fact that you're going to push us to do more. And that's part of the synergy that's necessary to continue our momentum. And frankly, we need that push, because as is the case in all of politics, no matter what I want to do or the governor wants to do, there's always going to be forces pushing back from a different direction. So we need you to push us forward and say, no, our community, our advocates, our partners are pushing us to do even more. And I think I'm very grateful that the governor takes that opportunity every chance he gets to do more. In 2020, I introduced AB 3030, a measure that would place our state at the forefront of global environmental conservation. The bill would have addressed the climate and biodiversity crisis and ensured all Californians have equitable access to outdoor spaces, especially communities of color and those economically disadvantaged. AB 3030 came at a particularly critical time when nature was in a state of crisis and experiencing a global pandemic. Protecting 30% of our lands, waters, and oceans is only scratching at the surface, as we all know. More needs to be done to combat the crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss. And sometimes people ask, where did that number 30 by 30 come from? And it's scientists. And many of whom are here. I mean, it was the scientists that told us. It wasn't just a catchy number that we came up with. It's a global goal of achieving 30 by 30. And although AB 3030 stalled in the legislature, I was pleased and very proud to see Governor Newsom did not stall in taking action to protect 30% of our water and land by establishing the executive order on 30 by 30. Being here today with all of you brings me such pride to know that the 30 by 30 movement did not end in the legislature, and we stand here together to further the efforts. However, I'd be remiss if we didn't recognize the support of so many supporters, and particularly the AB 3030 sponsors, Audubon, Azul, Defenders of Wildlife, and Natural Resources Defense Council. So a big thank you to them for their dedication and leadership on environmental issues generally, but also in being part of planting that seed here in California. Furthermore, I'd again like to take this time to thank Governor Newsom in general for his incredible leadership, but for his continuing support in these efforts by signing a bill, the bill AB 2278 last week. AB 2278 continues to further our 30 by 30 goals by ensuring the legislature and environmental groups and advocates are well informed on the updated progress and plans to accomplish the state's goals based on annual reporting. And it's with these partnerships we can turn the tide for our struggling ecosystems, for the planet, and ourselves. And we all need to be held accountable. whether it's the administration, whether it's the legislature. As Secretary Crowfoot said, look, we can say 30 by 30 and that's great, but where's the action? And, I think that but ultimately it's important to have that energy, to create that energy, then thereby allowing us to figure out, okay, what are the next steps? And part of that is accountability for ourselves, but also pushing forward and bringing others on board, not just here in our state, but around the planet. California has always been a leading example for the nation and world to follow, and will continue to advocate to combat climate change. Thank you to CNRA for all of your leadership and continuing to work towards protecting biodiversity. And I look forward to engaging in conversation to further our efforts to achieve our 30 by 30 goals. Thank you all so much.
And the assembly member made a great point. We have strong environmental champions like him in our legislature, but as we were discussing 30 by 30 with some of our legislators, what we heard sometimes is, well, 30 by 30 is really not, something that's really necessarily a priority. And what I always said is, well, do you know that open space that your communities have wanted to preserve for the last 20 years, or that, that park or that natural area that would improve the quality of life in your district? That's 30 by 30. So, folks here today here in Sacramento, but across the state, remember that it's important for us to help connect with our legislators here in Sacramento to help them understand that they can meet their goals. You can meet your local goals through 30 by 30. So, as par for the course with these hybrid meetings in the age of the pandemic, Senator Skinner's Zoom crashed, but now I understand it's back up. So we will transition to the screen here and hopefully hear from Nancy Skinner. She is joining us from the Bay Area, and again was a real champion of the funding that Governor Newsom identified in this year's budget for nature-based solutions and for 30 by 30. So let's connect with Senator Skinner.
Thank you so much, Secretary Crowfoot, and appreciate the governor's remarks and his executive order that created this partnership. And thank all of you for participating in this mission and being part of the 30 by 30 partnership. And Osh, apologies, you didn't get to take up all my time. Oh, well, my good colleague, Assemblymember Kalra. It's very important that we, people like myself and Assemblymember Kalra, have strong champions in the legislature for initiatives like this. But as Governor Newsom mentioned, we're fortunate. California already has approximately 24% of our lands and 16% of our coastal waters that are conserved. And where I live in the East Bay, I'm so fortunate, and all the residents of the East Bay, because local leaders back in the Great Depression, now imagine this was during the Great Depression, had the wisdom to create a regional park district and to make its mission to buy up as much open space as possible and preserve it for public use. So of course, my good East Bay Regional Park District now is the largest regional park district in the country, with over 100,000 acres of land within its boundaries, and partnerships with state parks, where the East Bay Regional Park District operates about 3 of our state parks. But we need to build on local, regional, and state efforts to ensure that we expand protected lands and coastal areas, and that adequate protections are in place so that those areas can thrive. Because we know, as Secretary Crowfoot has mentioned, as the governor has mentioned, as Assemblymember Kalra, that the type of ecological threats that we are currently under are really creating mass extinctions. And we may not appreciate the importance of the different species that we're losing, but they're all part of an ecosystem. And we now understand that ecosystems are intricate webs and they all depend on each other. So we know from the new research about trees that plants and animals and trees are connected through a living web. And so it's not enough to focus on a single species. We have to preserve and protect ecosystems. So I was really proud, I'm chair of the Senate Budget Committee, that this year's Healthy State Revenues gave us the opportunity to budget, as Governor Newsom mentioned, record funding to protect the state's our water resources, forests, wildlife, agricultural lands. We put in over 245 million, for example. The full amount was billions and billions, but over 245 million for oak woodlands conservation, for riparian habitat conservation, rangeland protection, and a variety of other things. We also put money in to acquire some new lands, which I thought was great. But many of the investments that we made with the healthy revenues we had this year and last require project partners like you to make sure that we operate them correctly and the projects get off the ground and that these ecosystems can thrive. So thank you for being partners in preserving a flourishing California for our children and grandchildren. And I look forward to continuing this partnership and being one of your strong partners. Thank you.
Well, Nancy, you came through loud and clear on the Zoom. I think sometimes when you're zooming into a large in-person meeting, it's a bit of an act of faith to understand if people are going to see you. Nancy, your head was about 12 feet tall. You were big on the screen. So message delivered, and just huge thanks to your leadership. Look, make no mistake, 30 by 30 is not a solution to all the environmental challenges that we face. We have tough questions about how we manage the environment as it relates to water policy, water management, forest management. We have land use conflicts that we're mediating across the state. But I'm really excited about 30 by 30 because I feel like it's our ability to play offense, to help our ecosystems, help our nature stay healthier upstream from having to protect an endangered species or take emergency action. And I feel like, and we feel like 30 by 30 has lit a spark, frankly, because it's the wind in the sails of your ships that have already been moving. Meaning you all have been on the ground across the state, engaged in this conservation with projects underway and big plans, and sometimes not enough support from state, federal government, not enough resources, too many barriers. And so 30 by 30 is all about enabling your success. I talk about this as a movement, and let's be clear, this is not a centrally planned activity from Sacramento or Washington, D.C. It can't be, and we're going to fail if that's the case. It's really about empowering you all to do what you're really good at, which is go out there and improve and expand conservation across our state. And we have a big challenge, and we've given ourselves a big challenge. We were clear about the metrics we used, and that requires us to conserve or improve conservation on almost 7 million acres of land in 8 years. I told that to the governor. He said, well, it's actually 7.5 because you're halfway through 2022. But point being, we're holding ourselves accountable. So we have a lot of work to do together. And that's really where the partnership comes in. This partnership is meant to be a transparent and inclusive hub of organizing, of activity, of support. And from my point of view, it does 4 things. 1, it provides information and resources. So if you're somebody that wants to get a project done, we want to help you understand who in state or federal government can help you get it done, both with the resources and the information, technical support, permitting. Secondly, it's strengthening networks, connections, relationships, because at the end of the day, the connective tissue that you build today, but also in coming months, if you stay involved in the partnership, is going to help you. We are stronger together, moving all this work forward. Third, it's actually shaping our strategies and actions. So Jen will talk about the pathways document. That's really the beginning of identifying how we're going to get to our 2030 goal, but we need to adapt and we need to manage and we need to continue to improve our efforts. And this partnership will be where those conversations happen. And then lastly, it's all about removing barriers to your work, because we in government, speaking for myself anyways, I know that sometimes we are the barrier to getting work done. And we have to move at a pace and scale that we've never had to before, given the risk to climate change, given biodiversity threats, given the reckoning we've had in terms of really making good on this promise of providing more equity to communities across the state. So that's what the partnership's all about. And really the partnership is going to sink or swim based on your participation. We've got a great coordinating committee that hails from different parts of the state, different sectors. Huge thanks to the coordinating committee. You may hear them referred to as the PCC. And they're really helped bring us here today, and they're going to keep this partnership going. But if you have suggestions around what we should be doing, questions we should be answering, places we should be going, let us know. Talk to these coordinating committee members of the partnership today. Talk to Jen, talk to us, and we'll continue to breathe life into this partnership. Last point, the audacious is not only possible, it's necessary, right? So from our perspective, my perspective, we live at a really, really pivotal moment on this planet, in this state, if you're somebody who cares about people and nature. And from my perspective, we have the opportunity to show the world how people and nature thrive together. And I'll raise one example of audaciousness that inspires me. And that's a wildlife crossing that's currently under construction as of last week over Highway 101 in Greater Los Angeles. It's a wildlife crossing that's going to help preserve, to save a distinct species of mountain lion in Southern California that is being killed by a lot of reasons, but one of which is transportation collisions. And it is a wildlife bridge that's spanning, I believe, 11 lanes of traffic in Highway 101 and a frontage road. And it was literally the gleam in an activist's eye about 10 to 15 years ago, a woman named Beth Pratt, who works for the National Wildlife Federation. And she and so many others refused to take no for an answer. And both through the perseverance and consistency and just tremendous dedication, built this vision with people like myself and others that work across government. And we were able to have this groundbreaking earlier this year, and then we're able to build this wildlife crossing, which we hope will be a game changer for the Southern California mountain lion. That's possible. So what is your audacious idea? What's the idea, and what are the projects that you want to get done through 30 by 30? We're here today to help you realize that vision. So thanks so much for being here, and look forward to a great day.
Well, I don't know how I'm going to follow all that amazingness. John Jarvis said this morning, this is like a pep rally, and this is a pep rally. I want to hear a whoop from the crowd. I want to feel it. So this is our pep rally to get excited, but we got to go out and win the game, right? Are you laughing because your face is on the screen and 10 feet high? Well, there you are, Jen. You're part of the movement. You don't get a choice. All right, so Jen Eckerly and I are going to do an overview of our 30 by 30 approach and how we want to get our work done and where you fit in. And then we'll bring up some special speakers to do a deeper dive. For those of you that have seen me speak recently, this is a moment to go get coffee or a muffin because it will seem very familiar, but that's all right. So next slide, please. So the governor already mentioned, we committed to 30 by 30 through his nature-based solutions executive order in October of 2020. And that launched a year and a half of workshops and letters and calls and meetings and a lot of Zoom. I'm so excited we're not on Zoom anymore. But thanks to all of you. Next, we delivered our pathways document in April of, there we go, April of this last year. And I think of this as actually a crowdsourced document, because honestly, your engagement, your ideas, they made all the difference. We asked you, how does conservation work in California? What are the things that are successful? What are the things that need more help but could get us there if we just did a little bit of this and a little bit of that? We brought all your ideas together into this strategy that's really going to help us frame how we do our work moving forward. So what's in the document? Next slide. First we really start with, our framework. What are we trying to do? Why are we conserving land and coastal waters anyway, right? We have 3 key objectives that are protect our biodiversity, as everyone's already talked about, to increase access to nature, and especially for Californians that haven't had that access. Nature has so many benefits. We want to see that all over the state, and then use these lands to sequester more carbon and help our ecosystems and our communities be more resilient to the effects of climate change. These objectives are really important, and we always want to keep them in mind as we move forward. So that's what we want to do. But how do we want to do it? Next slide. We have some core commitments that we're going to talk a little bit more about today. But fundamentally, when we do our work, we want to advance justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. That should be central in our minds in everything we do. And at the same time, we really want to repair these relationships with our tribal partners. And and do more work to bring us all into the fold in managing these lands in a way that makes a lot more sense than what we've been doing recently. And then when we think about conservation, as the secretary mentioned, there's all these other conflicts we need to keep in mind, or objectives to keep in mind. We still need to have food. We need places to live. We have a clean energy future we're driving toward. So all of that needs to really underpin our work. Next slide. So what is a 30 by 30 conservation area? I joke that this part of the document was rewritten 15 times. It's actually not a joke. It was probably 20. But getting the definition right matters, because if you want to count something, you have to be able to describe it. So this is where we landed. Land and coastal water areas that are durably protected and managed to sustain functional ecosystems, both intact and restored, and the diversity of life that they support. And the key pieces of this, I highlighted it, is the durability, that those protections are in place for a long time, ideally forever, but that we're also thinking about functional, healthy ecosystems. So what does this look like on the landscape? Next slide. As the governor already mentioned, we're at 24% for our lands. That is awesome. Thanks to all of you. And as I like to say, we're not inventing anything new here with 30 by 30. We're just sort of taking credit and moving on. So 24%. And what does this look like? You know, this really shows up across a broad array of landscapes. It's the places you would normally think about: wilderness areas, ecological reserves, but it's also those regional open spaces, like in the East Bay, all those beautiful spaces that protect ecosystems, but where people can recreate. And then there's a lot of working lands that really protect our biodiversity, but allow people to continue their livelihood. Throughout California, we have great examples of that on oak woodlands, in some of our sustainably managed forests. But we also point out that all of these conservation areas, they exist in a matrix. What happens next door matters. So the conservation that we do across our landscape that doesn't necessarily meet our definition is still really important and necessary to lift up. So that's what it looks like on the lands. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jen Eckerly, who's going to talk a little bit more about the salty side, as I like to say.
Thanks, everyone. Before I start, I just have to say I'm so happy to be here. Secretary Crowfoot, your comments made me cry. Those of you that know me won't be surprised by that, but I'm really proud and honored to be part of this movement. So what does it look for coastal waters? So we're, as you heard, 16%, we're over halfway there. And that's really because we have this amazing network of 124 science-based marine protected areas that were created to protect the natural abundance and diversity of our marine life and habitats, and to improve ocean health. And our MPAs, they cover 16% of state waters. And we consider them to meet that definition of conserved because they are durably protected and they were created to safeguard the integrity of marine ecosystems. So that network of marine protected areas is currently undergoing its first decadal management review. And that review is going to be scheduled to be presented to the Fish and Game Commission in February of 2023. That review is really going to help the state understand how these marine protected areas are meeting their intended ecological goals. And that review could potentially result in recommendations that will help us better manage our MPAs into the future. But for right now, before that review is, until that review is complete, MPA changes to our MPA network are not going to be part of conservation for 30 by 30 in coastal waters. But we have 16% there, and we have some other strategies that we're really focused on to get us to 30. And the first is really around our national marine sanctuaries. So as we all know, national marine sanctuaries were created to protect really unique natural and cultural resources. Our sanctuaries, they really have areas that protect exceptionally biodiverse regions, and they do provide conservation benefits. But each of our sanctuaries are individual, and they have unique regulations and policies. And so those need to be assessed to really understand whether they are providing biodiversity benefits that meet our conservation definition. So we've been working already very closely with our federal agency partners and leadership at sanctuaries to understand where those conservation benefits are and where there are opportunities to strengthen biodiversity protections in sanctuaries. We're also exploring options and opportunities to provide California's Native American tribes establish a place where they can create indigenous marine stewardship areas to support and enhance tribal stewardship and engagement around coastal and marine resources. Tribally led conservation is key to our success in the state and meeting our 30 by 30 goals. And it is the state's responsibility to provide opportunities and funding for tribes to lead these conservation efforts to help us meet our goals. California's coastal waters also include other areas that might provide conservation measures. We have areas that can be considered de facto marine protected areas, places where there's restricted human activity, but it's not necessarily set aside for conservation benefit or intent. And then we've got places that are restricted or closed for the purposes of effective fisheries management. Those places may provide biodiversity benefit, but we still need some further study to assess whether they fully meet that definition of conservation in our pathways document. And all of this, we have more information that's needed and more scientific research to underpin these approaches. And we're going to move forward on all of those efforts to keep this moving forward. So I'll stop there and pass it over to Jen. Thanks.
Okay, so how are we going to get it all done? We came up with 10 pathways. There's nothing magic about this, but we like the number 10. So that's what we have. And I'm going to walk you through those. Next slide. So at the core, regionally led conservation is key. Local leaders, regional leaders, all of you, you know best what makes sense in your place. You've identified those special places that you want to protect, and you know what aligns with your local priorities. So we want to lift up regionally led conservation, provide resources for more regional planning if needed, especially in parts of the state that don't have regional conservation strategies in place, and work to accelerate those processes so we can get those plans on the ground, identify the places we need, and move forward together. Next. Of course, we want to execute strategic land acquisitions. That's the obvious one. Acquire land, put it aside. We put record amounts of money in the budget to do that. I'll talk about that at the end. But we want those to be science-based, aligned with local conditions, and strategic. They should be next to other places that are already protected ideally, or create corridors. So we want to do it in a smart way. Next slide. We want to increase voluntary conservation easements, use opportunities to work with our private land partners who don't necessarily want to sell their lands, but they want to continue to work them for conservation and have them bring in revenue for their families. People in the land trust community that are sitting out here, you all know how to do this really well. How can we improve our processes in state government to accelerate that? We got a lot of really good ideas from all of you about barriers to moving forward on easements. We're going to try to dig into those and make sure that we do our best to get those going more quickly. Next slide. We want to enhance conservation on existing public lands and coastal waters. Jen already talked about work we can do in the coastal area. Of course, we have hundreds of thousands of acres of federally owned, state-owned land where we have the opportunity to think about ways to elevate conservation. We're in conversation all the time about where those opportunities might be. Next slide. Mitigation is something we do a lot of in this state. We have one project, we find one place to offset those effects as required by law. But when we do it that way, we get these piecemeal mitigation projects. If we do them in advance, if we think ahead and programmatically set aside larger blocks of land that then can credit projects to those larger blocks, we're going to do a much better job of protecting biodiversity and actually offsetting the effects of all the other things that we do. So we want to work more on, we're working really well with Caltrans right now, thinking about ways that they can use, they have funding to actually purchase lands in advance that they can apply to their projects, but also conservation bankers. How can we move that forward faster? Next slide. Of course, we want to expand and accelerate restoration because we can't just protect our way out of the biodiversity crisis. There are ecosystems that are down to 1 or 2% of where they were when we started managing these lands. So we need to do restoration. We've been talking in the state about cutting green tape. That's one of my other jobs, my other hats. And that's, how can we get conservation restoration done more effectively? What are the barriers to getting your permits, to getting your funding on the ground? How can we, just be more effective at moving those forward faster? And I think we're doing great work in that space. Next slide. We want to strengthen coordination among governments. We've talked in a bit, and we'll talk a lot more about how we want to work better with our tribal partners. And at the same time, work with our federal partners. The United States has also committed to 30 by 30 with their America the Beautiful initiative. How can we work together to identify opportunities where we can pool our resources, pool our know-how, and really protect more land together and waters? Next. We want to align our investments. So what does that mean? In the state, just within CNRA, we have 50 different grant programs, and we've been talking about how can we strategically share information within those programs so that we can cut down on overhead, make those processes more streamlined, get the money out the door more quickly so that we don't waste time we don't need to waste on getting projects on the ground. We also have really amazing philanthropic partners who actually helped us put this party on today, and people within the outdoor industry and other industries that really want to bring resources to the table. They're excited about 30 by 30. How can we bring them into the fold and work together to get more done? Next. And then we really want to advance and promote these complementary conservation measures. So that matrix I was talking about, all the other things that we do that are important to making sure our 30 by 30 areas are healthy and thrive. So whether that's, healthy soils, on-farm practices, protecting pollinators. I just saw this great article. Did anybody see it? Where I think it's in Great Britain, they're building little bee gardens on top of bus stops. So cool. I want to do that, right? So we can do all kinds of things like this that will help with our biodiversity in places that maybe aren't protected, but they're going to get us down the line. And then last, we of course, next slide, want to, as Wade said, we want to evaluate what we're doing, adaptively manage, make sure that what we're delivering on the ground is actually meeting our objectives. So moving forward, there's lots of analysis to do to really dig in and keep track of our work. And next slide. Key to all of these, and we don't talk about this enough, but you're going to get an opportunity to see this in the afternoon. We built an amazing online GIS system. So geographic information system. These are digital maps of where biodiversity is in the state, what the state is going to look like under a bunch of different climate change scenarios. So sea level rise, precipitation, temperature changes. We have demographics of all the places that have access to nature. And then the slide that's on the top right, that's a depiction of all the places that already meet our definition. So you can play with these layers and identify conservation opportunities across the state in your place that are going to meet these different objectives. And when you look at these maps and you can see, oh, the place I want to protect is next to this other place that's protected. That may not sound like much to some of you in the private sector, but in government, I can tell you this is amazing. This is game changing. When I was at the federal government, we would have conservation properties on paper in a drawer. We had no idea really where they were except in someone's head. Being able to look at a map and play with it is huge. So I'm thrilled by this. This underpins anything. It helps our regional planning, make sure our investments are strategic, and it's going to help us track our progress toward our goal. CaliforniaNature.ca.gov, we'll say it a million times. That's our website. All this stuff is on there, but you can access this GIS there. I think that's my last slide. And I'm going to turn it over, yes, to Moises Moreno Rivera, excuse me. I'm so nervous. Come on up, Moy. He's going to talk more about how we can embed equity in our work.
Buenos dias. It's a little nervous having you in front of me, Wade. So, gonna put it out there. Mi nombre es Moisés Moreno Rivera y tengo el gran honor de servir al Estado de California como el suministro de equidad y justicia ambiental en la Agencia de Recursos Naturales de California. Gracias por estar aquí. My name is Moisés Moreno Rivera, and I humbly serve the state of California as Assistant Secretary for Equity and Environmental Justice here at the Resources Agency. Thank you for being here. Well, since I did it, gets, partnerships. While we have leaders here today that have kicked off this work. And we have an executive order that really cemented that work. The conservation space, as we've come to talk about today and we know, is not new to our state. Today we're here because of the connection we have to the work and with each other. As a former community organizer, it is great to see the partnerships established to address this key initiative. It is clear in my eyes that there's an understanding that there's a power in numbers. More on that later. A little over the past year, through collaborative and inclusive public engagement process, our agency, via my colleagues here today, have been asking people around the state for their input and feedback as to how they envision achieving 30 by 30. Since the get-go, through intentional regional workshops, we learned about the great work happening across the state and the incredible existing resources that have and are willing to be shared to ensure our work is effective and successful. We also learned of the well-established coalitions, as well as those that kicked off because of the need for their existence, either to bring attention to a region or to ensure that equity and environmental justice are prioritized in what we do. Again, showing power in numbers. You'll hear from my colleague Geneva that we also engaged in early, often and meaningful government-to-government consultations with California Native American tribes, honoring the established processes for tribal nations. For all the work that you all have done, thank you. Building meaningful partnerships takes time, dedication, and being responsive. We also heard across all regions of the state information that is far too familiar for low-income communities of color and California Native American tribes, that structural injustices and systemic racism influence land protection, ownership, access, use, and management of land in California, and resulted in dispossession and attempted destruction of tribal communities and other vulnerable communities, including increased concentrations of environmental pollution, limited access to nature and its benefits, being made to feel unwelcome, limited community engagement or exclusion from decisions of the management of lands and the waters, and the loss of sacred lands and species and the ability to steward them. It is because of this reality and your input, the 30 by 30 strategy aligns with broader state commitments to equity, tribal partnerships, and economic prosperity, and builds upon efforts to protect biodiversity, expand access to nature, and drive climate action. California's 30 by 30 initiative will advance and be shaped by 3 core commitments, as you heard today. One of them is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. I will focus on that for this talk. And I will focus on the principles that will embed these elements of our broader equity and environmental justice work. Next slide, please. So how does one foster meaningful efforts that bring along everyone, especially underserved populations in California Native American tribes? This principle touches on the very essence of the reality of our history. Decisions and actions we take must, at its core, as we've heard it from other speakers, confront the historic legacy that we have inherited. We do this by engaging with communities early in the process, so projects are shaped by the communities and our programs and investments address concerns brought to us by community. Process, I'll repeat this again, process is as important as the end result. It is not enough to get community buy-in, but rather a meaningful start to a partnership where there is mutual understanding and respect. Professor of mine, Carlos Munoz Jr., who was the founder of the first Chicano Studies program in the nation, has a famous quote that was very, very important for this conversation. It says, victory is in the struggle. Being involved in the process is as important to be shaping the outcome. Next slide, please. As we sustain and build new partnerships with communities' input, it makes it that much clearer for us to promote projects that improve and expand public health, Native American land stewardship, community resilience to climate change, high quality jobs, and meaningful access to nature. Next slide, please. We must be mindful, however, there is no cookie cutter approach to how we go about our partnerships with communities, especially low income, underserved, and under-resourced communities in California Native American tribes. This is why it's important to be proactive and engage early in the process and be responsive in the process to not only listen to understand the specific needs of a community, but also identify what type of technical assistance they need to be successful. Meaningful community engagement goes beyond informing or involving communities or providing language services. Pathways for meaningful collaborations must be explored to be responsive to input and concerns raised, as well as to identify what tools exist for communities. As we plan for continued partnerships, there are key considerations to be transparent in our processes. We must clearly define our goals. We must use our data and web-based tools and partnership knowledges or community expertise to better understand who will benefit or be burdened by an action. Will you need language access? Constantly remind my colleagues of this. What must be clear, what must be clear to the level of engagement is feasible for a project or action. So how much involvement is there for a particular action or project? Having a clear understanding of who our audience is and your timelines are instrumental. Lastly, we must be responsive and accountable to communities. I am thrilled for the 30 by 30 partnership, or the PCC, focus on supporting the implementation of 30 by 30 and to engage and empower all partners working towards its objectives. Within the partnership, there are leaders that have dedicated their careers to advancing equity and environmental justice, and others that have been incredible allies to that commitment to embedding equity in all that we do. Next slide, please. Having understood the scope of an action or a project with meaningful community involvement, it makes it all clearer as to how actions can be mitigated to implement projects that do no further harm or pose unintended consequences. Again, data and web-based tools, community expertise, and meaningful partnerships are essential in all of this. Next slide, please. Remember, there's power in numbers, and today I invite you to work with us to advance our core commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We have prioritized workforce equity in our agency, and we'll rely on you through collaboration and partnerships so that your perspectives are reflected in our work. I am delighted that recently the governor signed an executive order to embed equity in all that we do. This core commitment is also supported by the administration. It takes a village, or as we're calling them, partnerships, to be successful. Thank you, and I'll hand it out to Geneva.
All right. Well, thank you. And OCO, everyone. My name is Geneva E.B. Thompson. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, she, her pronouns, and very honored to be appointed as the first ever Assistant Secretary for Tribal Affairs at the California Natural Resources Agency. It really is a true honor to work with Secretary Crowfoot and the rest of the CNRA team on all of our initiatives here at the agency. And I just want to, express a huge appreciation for everyone, Secretary Crowfoot and everyone's leadership in ensuring that tribal partnerships is a key priority throughout all of our initiatives, including our Pathways to 30 by 30. And so I'm so excited to kind of walk through what we're thinking here today on how we can all strengthen partnerships with California Native American tribes as we move forward in conserving 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030. And so if we could do the next slide, please. So we've seen this conservation framework already. Jen has, already kind of walked us through this, but what I wanted to really highlight here today is that in our consultations with California Native American tribes, we heard loud and clear the importance of having partnerships and collaboration with tribal partners in each of not only the key objectives, but having that strengthening tribal partnerships as a core commitment that sets the full framework across our 30 by 30 initiative. And, I really think of this commitment as really coming out of the respect and acknowledgement that California Native American tribes are the original stewards of our lands and waters with deep place-based tribal expertise and traditional ecological knowledge. And this deep place-based knowledges have been here since time immemorial and have been keeping our lands and waters healthy and in connection with human, plant, and animal relatives. And that it's extremely important to acknowledge that these expertise and knowledges are a key component of how we move forward in our conservation effort. It's also important to acknowledge and understand the historical wrongs, state-sanctioned genocide, and harmful policies that have forcibly removed California Native American people from their ancestral lands and natural resources. And this forced removal from these lands and resources have led to destructive outcomes in our tribal communities, as well as widespread ramifications to the health of our lands, plants, and animal species, which is then further intensified by the climate crisis. And so the goal of strengthening partnerships with tribes is really to return the stewardship and co-management of these lands, waters, and resources so we can start to address those historical wrongs and move forward in the spirit of truth and healing in partnership and collaboration with California Native American tribes. If you could get the next slide, please. Another slide that we have already gone over, and appreciate Jen walking us through all 10 of these pathways. I bring this back up for us to really think about and understand that the core commitment of partnering with tribes is interwoven throughout each of these different pathways. And really to encourage all of you today, as you're thinking about in your work, in your efforts in the conservation space, is how do you work with your local tribal partners as you go through each of these different pathways. And as you're sitting down and planning out your projects, to be very intentional in reaching out to the local tribes and seeing how each pathway here can be done collaboratively with local tribal governments. We can get the next slide, please. So how do we do this, right? There's a lot of work to be done. Partnering with our tribal partners is key to the success of 30 by 30. And I'm so, thankful for Jen for including these principles in our guidance document here, because it really helps us think about how do we be intentional in moving forward in each of these principles in our core commitment to partnering with tribes. And so really the first one here is in the identification of conservation areas. Work with your local tribal leaders, have shared decision-making opportunities for the identification of those strategic areas that need to be conserved. Look and try to prioritize culturally important places that contain important gathering spaces or maybe sacred sites, and work with tribal partners to ensure that those places are also protected and have priority as we think about moving forward in this space. The second principle is early, often, and meaningful government to government consultation. And really to reiterate the point of early and often. And as you're sitting down and thinking about what conservation projects you all want to move forward on, work with your tribal governments early in the process with the goal of collaboration and partnership in the rollout of all of these different programs. The third principle is the return of ancestral lands. That is the easiest way to ensure that the original stewards of the land have those lands under their management and stewardship. And so if you are a land manager or have the opportunity to support ancestral land return, we strongly, encourage going down that path and identifying those opportunities. The fourth principle here is respecting tribal expertise, traditional ecological knowledge, and cultural knowledges. And in that respect, work with tribal leaders and those cultural or those knowledge holders. And instead of moving forward in working to get information for personal gain or for your organization's gain, really understand that those knowledges are held by people who have been stewarding and holding this information and these knowledges for generations, and that is something that needs to be respected and understood on the tribal level and isn't for non-native folks' personal gain. And so really respecting that deep traditional ecological knowledge and working with tribal partners to ensure that that knowledge is kept confidential when needed and is being respected. Principle number 5 is identifying opportunities to have tribes be in those spaces to use these deep place-based knowledges for the conservation and protection of these lands and waters. That can look like co-management. That can also look like hiring tribal staff to be supportive in conservation efforts, but ensuring that those folks who hold these important knowledges are the ones who are using them and working with the lands and waters. And last but not least, the 6th principle that we have here and sharing with you all today is the principles of increasing management, co-management, and of our natural spaces. And so working in partnership with tribe on the management principles of all of our lands and waters, and to ensure that there is a mutual benefit for all of us in these spaces as we go forward in our 30 by 30 efforts. All right, next slide, please. So the 30 by 30 partnership framework is key and huge, and tribal partners are right there. Very excited to show this beautiful graphic because that's how a visual component of how we're starting to think about how do we build this collective partnership. And it's important that tribes are key partners in our efforts and need to be part of the broader coalition. And so if you're leading regional collaborations or working with state or federal or academic partners, really, encourage you all to think about how tribal partners can be brought into that broader collaboration and collaborative space in our 30 by 30 efforts. Next slide, please. And so, while we, strongly encourage that every 30 by 30 project and nature-based solution funding works to seek meaningful partnership with California Native American tribes, we're also very excited to announce our new Tribal Nature-Based Solutions program. So this program is tailored to work directly with tribes and their nature-based solutions projects to ensure that the state is being a strong partner and really working into that core commitment of partnering with tribes. So we were very excited that the California Natural Resources Agency was appropriated $70 million this past budget to establish the Tribal Nature-Based Solutions Program. We're working on that program now and excited to work with all of the tribes and identifying how we build this program together to ensure that it's a tribally led process. So that's going to be completed in early, meaningful, and often government to government consultation, regional workshops, as well as roundtable sessions, and really collectively thinking about how we roll out the Tribal Nature-Based Solutions Program together in partnership with tribes. We're also excited to announce that the California Conservation Corps was appropriated $5 million for the establishment of the Tribal Youth Nature-Based Solutions Conservation Corps program, which is going to be an exciting program to work with tribes in developing workforce development in our nature-based solution space. And so our young Native community members can have the skill sets needed to build beautiful, exciting careers in conservation and nature-based solutions work. And so excited about this appropriation as well. And we'll be consulting with tribes on the development of the program and rollout in partnership with anyone who's interested. So we're very excited about these new announcements. And it's also my honor to have a few guests here today to share the projects that they are doing in their tribal communities and tribal governments. So it's my honor to introduce you all to Rosie Claiborne, who is the Director of the Yurok Tribes Cultural Resources Department and Tribal Heritage Protection Officer. So Rosie.
So Ayakwi, Neck now Rosie Claiborne, Turup, Esi, and Chwadun, Mate Wamechok. And I give my introduction like that, and I tell you where I come from. I come from the village of Turup along the Klamath River, and I come from the village of Big Flat along the Smith River in the Tolowa country. So I'm a Yurok tribal member, but I'm also a descendant of Tolowa. And it's really important to say that and to recognize those places that I come from, because those are what makes me who I am. They identify my family, they identify my tribes, and they identify my community. And so, you know, it is these places and the places that we live and the lands and the waters are what makes us tribal people. And every place in California that you step on is the homeland to somebody. And it is a place that people identify, and it is places that Native people have conserved and stewarded since the beginning of time, since time immemorial. And so everything that we do in this 30 by 30 initiative has to have a tribal focus, because that is the real stewards of this land. And that is how we get back to having such a beautiful, pristine place to call home. And, you know, part of that is the web of life and the way that we look at it, and that as humans, we're part of that. We can't have these places conserved without having humans as a part of that landscape. And tribes have managed that landscape. And there's places that they have always cared for and managed, harvesting, you know, traditional harvesting, plant collection, all of those things are management tools. And we can't look at them as being damaging nature. There is no thing as such pristine nature. It always has a human element. And that is how tribes have always managed that land. And today I get to give you some really exciting news on behalf of Chairman James, the Yurok tribe, and ways to actually make this happen and how to work with tribes. As I get to announce that we signed an MOU this morning with the California State Parks for the co-management of the district, Redwood, or North Coast Redwoods District in our ancestral territory up in Northern California. Well, I wasn't expecting that, but, you know, and this is a global MOU, and it outlines some really key things that need to happen in order to make co-steward and co-management happen. It's things that we have been working on at the tribe and in our ancestral territory for many years. I shared this morning when we kind of did the official signing. Is I worked for my tribe for 20 years. I started when I was in high school. And I've always worked in cultural resources. And, you know, part of it was, you know, I got drug along by my grandma, by my parents, you know, by leadership to meetings all the time. And a lot of times these were these government to government meetings, right? And they were to check a box. They weren't about meaningful consultation. They weren't about actually decision making level powers. And, you know, we always got told no. We got told no so many times that sometimes like that's my default. And Yuroks are a little feisty. And so sometimes like, you know, I don't know how to react when we're being told yes. And so these are, you know, and this landscape has really changed. And, you know, so thankful for Secretary Crowfoot, you know, Director Quintero, Superintendent Blyatz, and their leadership in being able to hear the word yes, and starting to move forward and actually getting to do the good work rather than always fighting. And so, you know, in this co-management MOU, we laid out some pretty big initiatives, you know, to work on. You know, it's access to ceremonial sites and religious sites. You know, we're in a time of revitalization in Yurok. You know, our people have always done our ceremonies. We're so grateful for that. But there was a time when they had to do them underground. They had to do them in people's homes. And, you know, before the fear of being killed or prosecuted for practicing their religion. And so now we're starting to do those more in the open and bringing them back. I mean, we brought a ceremony back in 2012 that hadn't been done in over 150 years. And, you know, that was brought back on a state park site because that's where that place was done. That's where that ceremony was done. And even in the beginning, you know, there was rocky relationships to try to get that down. Like I shared this morning, you know, we used to have to tear the sweat house down every year because it wasn't permitted. And so now with agreements like this and having key people in leadership positions, we don't have to do that anymore. And we start to navigate that and be able to be stewards of our land. You know, we signed a joint powers agreement with the state park in 2020 for the co-management and of Stone Lagoon or Chapek Alketa Visitor Center. And that's under my program. That is the first visitor center ran by a tribe in the state park system. And that was huge because and it kind of set the stage for being able to tell our own story and to return to that landscape. And so now we look at taking the larger picture of that visitor center and looking at the ceremonial sites that are around it and the villages that are around it and being able to provide our traditional ecological knowledge. Or, you know, sometimes my elders like, you know, want to define what traditional ecological knowledge is. And they said it's just being Indian. So I'd like to point that out because, you know, when we started talking about that, that's one of the things that they reminded me of. And, you know, making sure that our tribal members have access to those places. And so, you know, I can't explain how excited I am for this and being able to move forward to do the good work. I think one of the really key pieces of it and kind of one of the first things that we ticked off is access to the state parks for Yurok tribal members. And they can now access and gather within the state park system with a tribal ID. There is no longer needed a permit. Before, our tribal members would have to get a permit, and those permits were actually issued out of Sacramento. So we would work with our regional office and then they would send them over here and then get them back. And now we no longer have to do that. Our tribal IDs are recognized as a pass. And so that's huge. That's game changer. I know, you know, when we started looking at this, Victor Blythes in our state park, he gave us superintendent's passes to get through. And I love the story that our CEO Tara Lynn Apena shared this morning about her daughter and how proud she was to show that superintendent's pass to get in. Now I can only imagine that her daughter just has to flash her ID and just say, look at me, here I am. And, you know, my brother's a fishing guide on the Klamath River and the Smith River. And, you know, him and some of the other guys were having trouble getting into the parks. And so they were able to use those superintendent's passes. And now they can flash their ID and get in and have access to Yurok homelands. So I think, you know, it really is about conservation. And it's about what this means and what this could look like through this initiative. And, you know, I'm so honored to be here. Our chairman couldn't be here to make this announcement, and I know that he really wanted to be here with everyone, but I'm honored to be here and be able to say that. So with that, I think that's all I have.
Well, Wado, Rosie, for sharing that very exciting news. We're very excited about this co-management agreement and know that it's the start of many new and cool, exciting efforts here at CNRA, state parks, and all of our departments. So Wado, thank you to the Yurok tribe and your all's leadership in this space. It is now my honor to announce Miguel Luna, who is the director of the Ferdinand, Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, Tribal Historic and Cultural Preservation Department. And Miguel's going to share some exciting news as well.
I'm so glad there's not a big picture of me up there. I'm not so photogenic. I grew up by a river in my hometown of Colombia in South America, where I was born 51 years ago. And in that river, I learned a lot of things. But one thing I learned was I was entitled to nature. And with that entitlement comes that responsibility to care for it. And it was a weekend, every weekend, that was our church that I spent with my mom and my dad. And a kinship was formed with that river. For the last 20 years, I've been working on environmental issues, environmental justice issues, ensuring that communities of color and of the composition of myself, growing up with a single, my mom raising me on her own, that I have a responsibility to get back to that relationship, that kinship. But it really has been the last 3 years, the honor of my work to work for the Fernandino Tatavian Banner Mission Indians and to serve humbly as their Tribal Historic and Cultural Preservation Department Director. It was about, my name is Miguel Luna. It was about maybe almost 3 years ago, we were at an event with Secretary Crowfoot, Bruce Saito, Conservation Corps Director, Tribal President Rudy Ortega Jr. The event was over, it was a Climate Resolve event, and I said, Wade, what do you think about a Tribal Conservation Corps? And he said, yeah, do it. So this is your fault, and we thank you for that encouragement. Next slide, please. Rosie touched on traditional ecological knowledge, and this is what sparked the Piwaka'ai Tribal Conservation Corps at the tribe. And it really is looking at, while we acknowledge that written tradition is important in modern times, that oral tradition is equally as important. We acknowledge that laws and theories are key today, but cumulative collective experiences also play a role in what we're going to do with the Tribal Conservation Corps. So it was about 3 months ago here in this building during the open house of this beautiful space that we announced the Tribal Conservation Corps launch. And really, we're looking to develop our workforce, and we're looking to restore the land, but also to restore the history, to bring the truth about, who are the stewards and keepers of this land. The tribe has a Tatavian conservation, land conservancy, excuse me. We're looking at about maybe 150 acres currently, half of it coming through a mitigation through a development, and the other one we're going to purchase. And we want our youth to be the ones that manage that land. We want our youth to be the ones that tell the story of why it's important to maintain the land. So we're excited about it. Next slide, please. And with that is partnerships. And to form partnerships, you have to build relationships. So we're thankful to the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy who pitched in and gave us the $500,000 to start this program. And we're going to take our time. We know there's urgency, but we want to do this right. We want to measure it. There's some trials and errors, and we want to start with a small cohort of 9. And within that 9 cohort, we're probably going to have 6 managers that come out of it because we're going to grow exponentially. There's a big demand for our workforce at the state level, at the local level, regional, state parks. Everybody's saying we're ready. So we're thankful for that. We're thankful for the partnership with the California Conservation Corps. We're also partnering, this is being led within the tribe from one of the nonprofits, which is PACU, Cultural Community Services, and Community Nature Connection, where we're going to get some interpretive training, Nation certified, and state certified, where we're also going to get some college credit for that. So, you know, be patient. We're in outreach mode now to get folks enrolled. But we're excited about this. And really, you know, I want to thank the administration from top all the way, you know, from the governor, Wade, your office has been just such a superb partner. And Moises, I see why he brags about you so much. I was really impressed with your comments, so thank you. Jen, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we're a partner. In my role at the tribe, we're a partner moving forward. Your leadership in Geneva, I mean, amazing, you know, taking the time when we talk about meaningful, it really is there. You know, we were reached out early on. We were happy to support the initiative that landed 70 million. We want more. We need more. And we need a multi-year, right? We can't pass the hat every year. And this is, if we're truly committed, then we need to, this is my message to the legislatures here, to say we need more. And we need it multi-year, constant. That's all I have to say. I'll leave you with something that very beautiful action, and it's a call to action. It was a call to action to me and a call to action to all of you from a tribal elder. And he said, we're currently living in our children's past. Think about that. We're currently living in our children's past. Knowing that, there is no excuse for the action we need to take today. And Rosie, I want to say to you, congratulations and thank you, because it's because of your leadership in that MOU that the tribe is also in conversations about an MOU in Southern California for access to parks. So your work is important. And we look forward to continuing that partnership with state parks too, because everybody's rethinking the way they engage. And so thank you to all of you for being here. Thank you for providing this space to share my comments with all of you. I look forward to connecting later today and throughout. Thank you so much.
Wado, Miguel, for sharing all of that. And we're so excited to see how the Tribal Conservation Corps grows and develops. And so thank you for your leadership in this space. And please, you know, let us know how we can continue to support. So, you know, while a representative from the Wiyot tribe isn't able to join us today, I did want to take a very quick moment to share some exciting news regarding the return of Morwa Sherwad, which is 46 acres of coastal wetlands and uplands ancestral land return to the Wiyot tribe. And so we're very excited about we could get the next slide, please. We're very excited about this moment and having the opportunity to partner with the Wiyot tribe and identifying in this very important, culturally and environmentally important place as an opportunity for ancestral land return. These lands, you know, have deep cultural significance as well as important gathering places for the Wiyot people and are now returned back to Wiyot stewardship and restoration. And so we're so very excited about this partnership and the opportunity to work on this ancestral land return. We can get the next slide, please. The part that I really find is really beautiful about this project is not only that we're able to partner with the tribe on ancestral land return, but that it also really highlights the importance of partnership as we think about this work. You know, first, you know, the Wiyot tribe organized, you know, a wonderful group of different entities in partnership after they identified these lands as, you know, important for conservation as well as important for their people, and then worked with you know, the Ocean Protection Council, Jen Eckerly and her team in identifying, you know, funding opportunities through OPC's Proposition 1 coastal environmental justice program to have funds available for the purchase of the lands, as well as working with Cal Poly Humboldt, Humboldt Baykeepers, and Friends of the Dunes in partnership to go through the real estate transactions, to go through all of those detailed steps that it takes to get, from point A to point B in ancestral land return. And I just wanted to take a very quick moment to highlight this exciting partnership in the region, because I think it can serve as an example for all of us as we are thinking about our 30 by 30 efforts and how we can strengthen partnerships with tribes. So with that, Wado, thank you, Rosie, Miguel, for joining us today and sharing all of the amazing work that you all are leading, as well as thank you for the opportunity for today's event organizers, Jen Norris, Jen Eckerly, Jason, Madeline, and the 30 by 30 team. Really appreciate all of the effort that you all have done for this initiative to get today together and the opportunity to share the importance of tribal partnership in our collective 30 by 30 efforts. So Wado, and thank you.
Man, this is so great. This day is so great. So I think I talk to my son about this sometimes, when you look at something amazing happening, you have to remember behind every single amazing thing, there's just a person who got up and had their yogurt, put on their shoes and said, I'm going to do something great today. And then they did all the work, all the steps. So I hope you're getting a sense of what we mean when we talk about the partnership. It truly is all of us working together on our projects. It's everyone in this room, and it's everyone who's out there who's not heard of 30 by 30, but I hope after today, you'll go tell them about it and say, you're actually part of this. When I worked at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, there's a horrible federal building up on Arden Way. If any of you have been there. And there was this wonderful man who came at the end of the night. I'd be working late and he'd take out, the trash and, wipe down the counters. And I would say, Steve, do you know that you work in conservation? He's like, what are you talking about? And I said, you're part of our team. You're part of what makes my day possible, right? So everybody, thank you for the thank you, Geneva. I thought about starting thank yous and then I thought I will never end, because it is truly a list of 4,000 people who helped us get to this point. But I do want to give a shout out to my team who helped make this day happen. Make sure you stop by their Pathways table later and say hello, because they've done a tremendous job, as well as the CA Nature team, people from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. They spent a year working on this project as an other duty as assigned, and they did an amazing job. Okay, so it's all of us. Next slide, please. So what is the actual vision? What are we talking about? We're like the blue circle in the middle. All of us, we're all sort of swirling around, but we're also part of organizations that exist and are already doing work. Wade and I talked about this. We didn't want to reinvent something. We want to create a new thing. We just want to create a space to bring you all together. So that's the vision. So Geneva mentioned tribal partners. We have an obligation to do consultation in a respectful and private space. That will continue. But of course, tribal members are part of the larger community as well. So people come in and out of these circles. So that work will continue. Hopefully it will continue with all of you in the work that you do. Shout out to the California Biodiversity Network. Who in this room is part of that? Wave your hand. These are folks that have been carrying the torch on biodiversity actually since 2018. And they put together an incredible appendix of science needs to help us advance 30 by 30 on the lands. And they are helping us answer those questions, creating space for conversation and dialogue. They will continue their work, but then they'll come to the partnership and tell us what they're up to. The Biodiversity Council has been around since the 90s. This is a state and federal loose coalition of governments that came together and said, we care about biodiversity before it was cool, and let's figure out how to work together. Well, right now we've got the federal and the state both driving on 30 by 30. So we said, let's make sure when we work together, we're looking for ways we can leverage our funding. The federal government has a tremendous amount of funding for helping us with all kinds of resilience and conservation projects and restoration. So, and we do too. So bringing those together in a space and looking for opportunities, that's what we're committed to do moving forward. So we'll continue those meetings, but we'll bring them back here. Regional work groups and coalitions, that's a really loose bucket, but there's lots of you out there. I see Annie from Together Bay Area. There are, folks that are implementing habitat conservation plans all over the state. Those are groups of people that are working on things. You're going to keep doing your work. You're going to be identifying places to protect. You're going to be lifting up your partners. We want you to come and tell us what you're up to, ask for information, share that information with us. And then the Ocean Protection Council, which has existed for how long, Jen? No pressure, 2006 test. So they, of course, are working on with all of our state partners on stewarding our coastal waters, and they will continue their work, but they will again bring it back to the partnership. Next slide. So that little circle in the middle was the coordinating committee. So look, oh, see, there you go. Look for these faces in the crowd. Some of them already spoke up here today. So they're sort of our extended eyes and ears and voices. They're going to help us reach out to you, bring information back to us, make sure that we're communicating, because I'm one person. I can't be in every meeting. It may seem like I'm in every meeting, but I am not. And so there are extended network of really amazing leaders all over the state that are going to just help us move this forward. They'll be upstairs later. I want you to make sure you say hi. They're on your 5 people you have to meet that you maybe haven't met before. Next slide. Oh, I'm going to let Jen talk about how that, so this is like a decentralized movement, right? That's what you should be hearing. We're all working all over the state. The partnership is trying to bring that together. A little bit different on the coastal side. Jen's going to talk about that.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, so because the ocean is different, it's a public trust resource. It belongs to all of us. So it really lends itself, conservation in the coastal waters lends itself to a more centralized approach. And so to that end, the Ocean Protection Council is going to serve as the coordinating entity to be a venue for discussion with and among tribes and fishermen and NGOs and state and federal partners and community members and others to really determine and develop this collaborative implementation roadmap for how we're going to get to 30% conserved in coastal waters. And so what does that look like? We're at the very beginning stages. We are going to be engaging deeply with our sister state agencies. We want to make sure they're along every step of the way. And we want to make sure that the decisions that we're making are aligned with their priorities and their natural resource protection actions. We are going to lead tribal consultations, listening sessions, and other engagement opportunities to make sure that we're elevating the voices of California Native American tribes and that we're able to reflect priorities and stewardship opportunities in implementation of 30 by 30. And we're going to create a venue or venues for lots of stakeholder engagement. So places where we can have discussions, where we can hear perspectives and priorities and ideas. And we want to hear that from the breadth of everyone in California. So we want to hear perspectives around environmental justice, conservation, access, fishing, and information from our federal partners. And all of that is really reliant on us making key investments in additional science. So there's a fantastic appendix E. I'm looking at Mike Escrow, who is the lead author there. And that lays out all of the priority research questions and information needs that we have to really get to 30% in coastal waters. And so that involves things like, where are the places that we should be prioritizing for protection? Where places like climate refugia? And then what are the strategies on how we do that? So does that look like restoring degraded habitats or something else? So, and in addition to that, we have a responsibility to monitor and evaluate how we're tracking our progress. Are we meeting, we don't want to just say we got 30% on paper, we're done. We really want to actually see these biodiversity benefits happening in the ocean. And so that means leveraging existing monitoring programs, building off of those, engaging, incorporating traditional knowledges, community expertise, and really continuing to track and sing our praises as we make this incredible conservation project progress. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Jen. Oh yeah, next slide, sorry. Very important. So how are we actually going to do this? As you heard, we've got unprecedented amount of funding to support all of our natural resource protection and conservation. And so for the Ocean Protection Council, we've got about $230 million right now, and that funding goes to support all of our strategic priorities, many of which are going to advance 30 by 30 priorities around protecting biodiversity, advancing equity in all of our work, and building resilience to the impacts of climate change. So you can see, that ranges from sea level rise, vulnerability assessments, habitat restoration and protection, and ongoing research and monitoring. And then the Coastal Conservancy, just raining money on them. They've got probably close to or over $700 million to do great work on the coast and on the associated land. So again, habitat restoration and protection, acquisition, really building coastal resilience using nature-based solutions. And they also have funding to provide resilience for wildfire. And with that, I will now turn it over to Jen to continue to talk about all the money.
So we're highlighting the money because we want you to understand that this is where you go to get your projects done. I would love to have a 30 by 30 checkbook, but Wade didn't trust me with it. So we distributed the money to all these other amazing entities that know how to get this work done, and they will be your partners. P.S. They will all be upstairs later, so you have an opportunity to visit with them and find out how their processes work. I will point out, Geneva mentioned 70 million for tribal. I'm going to say 100. You're going to say, what's going on? I'm talking about 2-year money that came through this budget because we're counting on that money for next year, but we do need your support to make sure that happens. So Wildlife Conservation Board, we, through our nature-based solutions, set aside funding $245 million for a suite of programs, including the brand new Desert Conservation Program. Shout out for that. So they will be upstairs later to tell you all about it. Make sure you check out. Of course, they have other programs. I think they have a dozen, but these were the ones that really had a backlog of projects that we wanted to make sure got funded. Next slide. The Department of Fish and Wildlife, also a fair amount of resources for wetland restoration, wildlife corridors, and then community planning through their natural conservation, I can't even say it. Such a day. Community conservation planning and acquisition, so both, and then resource conservation investment strategies funding for that as well. So both of those are planning funding, but also money to acquire the lands that were identified through those plans for the NCCP. So that's super exciting. And then the tribal nature-based solutions funding that will be specifically targeted for working with our tribal partners. Next slide. 120 million to our conservancies distributed through all of them. I didn't go through the budget and put all their different numbers on this, but they each got a proportion of that funding, as well as the Delta Conservancy got 54 million for wetland restoration. There's Campbell in the back. Make sure you ask him, how are you spending that money, Campbell, and how can I help you? So the conservancies will be upstairs staffing different booths. Next slide. And then talking about those other complementary conservation measures that are really important, right? We've got the Conservation Corps. They're helping us do restoration. They're doing job training. They're building community engagement around our work. The Department of Conservation has multi-benefit land repurposing, climate smart land management, which is a lot of technical assistance to help people figure out how to do some of this work. They have a suite of other programs they will talk about, but these are the funds that came through this budget. And then our partners at the Department of Food and Agriculture, there was $10 million for healthy soils just in our nature-based solutions budget, but they have 4 or 5 other programs they're going to tell you about in their booth today. So make sure you stop by and see them. Other people that will be upstairs, we've got the 5th climate assessment. They're going to talk to you about all the different great work they're doing to help make sure we're meeting our climate change goals. I already mentioned CA Nature. We've got Power in Nature, which is a coalition of coalitions around the state. So they are going to be present to help you understand how you might want to plug in locally. I'm probably forgetting others. There's a cool map. So this afternoon is going to be fun, and I expect to see people having fun. And if you, next slide. So what next? First and foremost, connect today. Make sure you talk to people, make new friends, get information, build the energy, get a bumper sticker. For those of you that are on Zoom and you're missing out, you're not missing out. The thing we're going to do next, we're going to recreate the expo virtually. So we're going to set up a time, look for the announcement. If you're not on our listserv, now's your chance. We're going to do sessions with each of the booths basically and give them an opportunity to talk about their programs. They're looking at me like, did we agree to this? You did. We're gonna do these virtually, set up a half an hour where you can visit with the Wildlife Conservation Board and ask them questions about their process and how it works. So that's coming at the end of this month. And then of course, throughout the year, our plan is to have as many convenings as we can squeeze in. So, and it will come in probably different formats, many of which were the kinds of things you saw during the workshops when we built the plan. So there might be panels, there might be dialogue, there might be a workshop. I'm hoping that more of them can be in person. That's my dream. Hybrid meetings are hard, but we'll probably have to keep doing those and ask for your patience when things explode. So as part of that, we want you to share your ideas. So later today upstairs, you will see a wall asking you questions. Two of the questions are, what are the outstanding things you still don't know that we failed to answer? And what are your great ideas for work you can do? We're also going to drop into the chat in Zoom those same questions in a survey so we can hear from all of you out there and who are beaming in virtually. We really want your thoughts. The secretary made that point. It's really important. We only are successful if we know how we can help each other. So I know no one complains when you get to go home early or leave early. You can't go home. Secretary, do you want to say any closing remarks? Or you, of course he does. All right.
Well, one is, Jen, you have to help people understand where they can find lunch. But that, okay, great. In the program. So we have a well, and this is not why I stood up, but I'll say, we have a decentralized lunch program. There's a great farmer's market. You know, Sacramento is an incredible place to actually eat a lot of food that's produced right around it. They're just a few blocks away. That's the last weekend, I think, of the summer farmers market on Capitol Mall. So that's my personal recommendation, but then you can find out other places to go. We got a great area to eat and hang out downstairs. And then we're going to be upstairs at 1 o'clock. But I wanted to say this, which is, I'm really excited by the progress and I hope you get a sense of our energy and optimism. We also understand more is needed. More funding is needed, more resources are needed, and we recognize that. You know, I'm excited about the amount of attention and funding we have, and in some cases it's more than we've ever had before. At the same time, we know more is needed. Here's my pitch though, is we have to be successful utilizing the funding that we have. We have to lift up our progress. When you actually achieve something great, like what you heard about here today, you have to tell your story. You have to help us tell your story, because we want to get 120 legislators in Sacramento excited about 30 by 30. We want to get our federal congressional delegation excited about your work. There's already a lot of enthusiasm and leadership, but we need to build this movement. We are not declaring victory, far from it. We're marking progress. So just take away that today and help us understand how we can build momentum and what you want to see this partnership do, because truly it is our partnership. So thanks for your attention this morning, and we'll see you upstairs at 1 o'clock.